everybody. It's Tara with Mountain Girl Myths, Lore, and Ghosts. The last few episodes we've hung around in Colorado. So today I've decided that we are going to leave the States entirely and head to England. Now we're going to be focusing on Northern England, and then we're going to be focusing on Chillingham Castle. Chillingham Castle is super dark and twisty. So we're going to kind of dive into that dark and twisty. It started in the 12th century. Okay, so monks lived there under this place called Ross Hill. They built a little house or a monastery, and then the Greys come rolling along, and they decide that they're going to turn that into a stronghold. The reason they're going to turn it into a stronghold is because since it's at the border with Scotland, it's all kind of turning into a dangerous mess. And it's a good thing that they turned it into a stronghold, because in 1297, William Wallace and his forces actually raided Chillingham Castle. Yes, that took place there. And while they were there raiding it, William Wallace puts the women and children into a church and lights it on fire, kills them all. Now, Edward the First, does anybody remember what he's called? Two things spring to mind. We got Longshanks because he was very tall, and then we got the Hammer of the Scots. So we are going to call him Eddie. So Eddie says, hell no. He goes charging up to Chillingham, and he decides he's going to make that his base of operations. So now they're in trouble because he got the hammer. Eddie the Hammer is chilling at Chillingham Castle. And so obviously they're fighting. And okay, so you got Edward the First, Eddie the Hammer at Chillingham Castle. Now, 1297, like I said, it is now the Scottish War of Independence, the very first one, the first Scottish War of Independence. And it's getting real. We have a lot of prisoners of war now showing up at Chillingham. They're filling this tiny little dungeon, they're filling the torture chamber, and nothing's really happening to them at this point. Now, meanwhile, while the castle's filling up with, I say prisoners of war, but it's really women, children, soldiers, spies, anybody with a Scottish accent basically is getting chucked in here. Now, during this time, we have a character called John Sage. Now, John Sage is a sadistic SOB. He's pissed because during the war, he injured his leg. So now he's got a bum leg, and he can't be a soldier anymore. He even rose to the rank of lieutenant. So he goes to Eddie the Hammer and says, I need a job. You see, during the war, I got a bum leg. So Eddie the Hammer says, hey, I got something just for you. I've got this castle right over here, and it's filling up with people that need tortured. So John Sage says, yeah, I could do that. Goes to Chillingham Castle. Now he's the resident torturer. So he likes torturing so much, he's getting about 50 people a week. And this goes on for 3 years or so. It's estimated that over 7,500 people actually died on Chillingham property, or the grounds of Chillingham. That's a lot of dead people. And that's not really even counting those that, are being hung for, poaching, just the regular stuff they would get hung for. And so, got a lot of dead people on these grounds. So, war's over. Still have all these prisoners. And John Sage says, I could let them all go and go back to Scotland and live the rest of their lives, but that doesn't seem as much fun to me as what I'm about to do. John Sage takes the adults down to the courtyard and lights them on fire, burns them alive, and if that's not sick enough, all of their kids are up in the Edward room, or the killing room, and they're watching their parents get burned alive. So after that trauma, when you think it can't get any more messed up, John Sage goes up to the Edward room, or the killing room, and he decides he's going to hack all of those children to death with an axe. That axe is still on display in Chillingham Castle, by the way. So he hacks them all alive, or hacks them to death, because he knows that if they grow up, they're going to hate the English, which rightly so. So that doesn't happen. Now he's kind of bored. He gets this girlfriend, and her name is... Don't mind my kids over there. Okay. Her name is Elizabeth Charlton. So they're down in the torture chamber because, that's romantic. And they're down there and they're getting kinky. And he, hooks her up to the rack. And he decides he's going to really show some interest and start to strangle her. Well, he goes too far and actually kills her. Now, Elizabeth's dad is actually one of the leaders of the Border Reavers. So, the Border Reavers are kind of like the outlaws of the border. They attack both sides. But at this moment, they're on King Edward I's side. So, King Edward I, Eddie the Hammer, can't let the Border Reavers get pissed off at him and his cause. So, he says, okay, what can I do? And they say, hand over John Sage so we can hang him. And, Eddie the Hammer says, oh, okay, here he is. And gives it to him. So they string him up in the tree on Chillingham grounds. And he's supposed to be hanging, right? Now, it's not a quick hanging. It's one of the strangulation hangings. So he's there kicking. He's not dying right away. And the Reavers decide that it would be interesting, I guess, to take trophies off of him. So as he's hanging there alive, they start cutting him up, taking chunks off of him. And he slowly dies that way. Now, is that a painful enough way to die? No, but I guess it'll do. I mean, this guy was so sick. There was one thing that they said that he did. This kid knew where, I guess, the hiding spot of these outlaws were, or at least they said he did. So he wouldn't give up the information. So what John Sage did was he got this barrel, and in this barrel he put spikes through the barrel. Puts this kid in the barrel and then rolls it downhill. Obviously, as it rolls, it's like a dryer, except without it getting dry, it's tearing into this kid's flesh, and that's how he died. So, I mean, this guy was awful. So if there could be a more painful way to die than having little chunks of flesh cut off you while you're strangling to death slowly, I think he deserves it. So that passes. But now, since that war is for the most part over, there's still trouble back and forth, but the actual main war... Okay, so now we're going to jump forward about 40-ish years. Now we're in the year 1344. Edward III is now king, and he issues a license to crenellate Chillingham Castle, and that means really fortify it. Put up walls and make it super strong against the enemy. So, Sir Thomas Grey, who was the lord of the manor at that time, gets that license, and he's appreciative because he knows that, the royalty or the kings don't hand that out lightly. Because not only could that fortress be used to protect that general area, it can also be used to go against the king. So if you build up a force, now you got a fortress to attack the king. So it's a big deal to get the license to do this. And the license actually is still at Chillingham Castle, which is pretty neat. So, so they put a curtain wall around it, and it's like in a quadrangle. I can't talk tonight. So, and also if my voice breaks up, it's because I'm pretty sure my kids gave me a cold. And if you hear them hacking in the background, they're sick. So, FYI. So if my voice gets a little rough, that's what it's from. Alright, so outer curtain wall too. And they finish it just in time because what happens again? Another Scottish invasion. This time it's led by King David II. So I don't have much information that happens in between, but just know, gets invaded again, more people die in the area, go figure. Now, Chillingham continued as the guardian of the border region for the next 200 years. So, once again, it's not known to be a peaceful place. 200 years equals a lot more people dead, a lot more bad history, a lot more sadness is getting basically, attracted to this spot. Now you got the War of the Roses. The Grey family itself was split, but the Lord of Chillingham was always loyal to the crown because he knows what side his bread's buttered. Now remember how I told you earlier that to get permission to, fortify was a big deal? This is why. So the War of the Roses, for those of you who don't know, it was the Yorkists against the Lancastrians. The Lancastrians was started by Henry IV, Henry Bolingbroke, right? And he thought that Richard II wasn't good enough to be king. So knocks off Richard II, he becomes Henry IV. And that goes through to Henry VI, who, bless his heart, tends to be a complete imbecile. So bad that Margaret of Anjou has a baby, and this guy's in a catatonic state, has no idea what's going on. So, he's going mad. I'm sure there's a whole lot of psychiatric reasons of why he's insane. His mother, Catherine of Valois, actually, her dad was insane. He thought he was glass and all sorts of craziness. But I won't get into that because it's a rabbit hole I could climb down. So, got the War of the Roses happening. It is Henry VI versus Edward IV. Edward IV's Yorkist, Henry VI Lancastrian. So, spoiler alert, Edward IV wins. Now, all this time goes by. The Greys that were against the Yorkists apparently made peace, and the Lords of Chillingham still loyal to the crown because obviously move your allegiance over. So it kind of continues this way, but now we have the Tudors in power. And I know I skipped over quite a few steps, but Richard III gets killed after he kills his nephews in the tower. Bosworth Field happens. Henry Tudor VII kills Richard III, becomes king, has a son Arthur, marries Catherine of Aragon. Arthur dies. Henry VIII marries Catherine of Aragon. Catherine of Aragon only gives him one daughter and a bunch of stillbirths. You got Queen Mary. So one of her ladies in waiting is Anne Boleyn. Henry VIII gets super attracted to Anne Boleyn, thinks he's in love with her, wants to divorce Catherine of Aragon so he can marry Anne Boleyn. Catholic Church says no, so he battles for I think something like 7 years with the Catholic Church, and finally somebody says, if you were the head of your own church, the Church of England, you could divorce yourself, you could call the shots. So Henry, obviously megalomaniac, says that's a fantastic idea. So now we've got the Church of England, or Anglican Church, and they're Protestants. He is now the head of the church, says, poof, I'm divorced, marries Anne Boleyn, starts taking down all the monasteries, collecting all the money, yada, 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 taking down the Catholic Church in England. So now you have this uprising in the north, and this one is called the Pilgrimage of Grace. So you got a bunch of Catholics who are pissed off that they no longer get to be Catholic, because at this point, if you're Catholic, bad news. you actually have to pledge allegiance to the Church of England as well as Henry VIII. So this uprising happens, right? And sorry, once again. Hope it's not the Rona. That's all I know. All right. So once again, Chillingham's a part of that. Now we're going to move on to my favorite queen, Queen Elizabeth I. Excuse me. So during Queen Elizabeth I's time, Chillingham's role had morphed into, instead of more of like a fortress or a battlefield, it's morphed now into like a diplomatic capacity. Now, the person in charge at this point is Lord Ralph Grey. He was the godson not only of Lord Burleigh, Elizabeth's top minister, but of Elizabeth I herself. And so Grey helped smooth the passage of Scotland's king, James V, or the Sixth, I'm sorry, to the English throne. So he was James VI of Scotland and James I of England. So he acted as like a go-between. And then once James came down and started going south towards London for his coronation, he actually stayed at Chillingham Castle. So it was at this time that Chillingham began to take on a more comfortable and refined aspect, okay? Because if you're going to be, in politics and be a diplomat, you have to basically show that, you're financially powerful. So they start trying to, spruce it up a bit. So, but even though it's starting to look pretty and more luxurious, you have all these dark secrets still hidden literally in the walls. The entire place has had a dark cloud over it since it was originally built. I mean, I guess the monks wasn't really dark, but right after it became dark, right? You have all these wars happening, all this death and destruction, people getting burned alive, horribleness. So now it's, a pretty country house. In the 19th century, renovations uncovered the skeletons of a man and child hidden near a trap door to the underground vaults. It was believed that they went down there due to like the border reavers, or they died because of the border reavers. Now I don't understand. Are they hiding there, or are they were they trying to escape the raid? Because I don't beat them. That's the problem. Spare the rod, right? They're lucky they're cute. Alright, don't knock over that. Okay, now we're going to get into the actual ghost stories. Now, I gave you kind of the history of the castle so you can see how some of these stories kind of tie in. That, and I think it's pretty cool. So, hopefully you have hung in there up until this point, because now it's going to get good. So the poet Longfellow begins an apt description of Chillingham with the following verse. All houses in which men have lived and died are haunted houses. Through the open doors, the harmless phantoms on their errands glide with feet that make no sound upon the floors. The castle ghosts include the Grey Lady, which I told you about, John Sage. Now, what John Sage does is he causes malevolent feelings throughout the castle, and in the torture chamber, you'll smell a foul odor because that man stunk. Everybody stunk, but he had to stink worse because he was an evil bastard. So you're going to smell something foul, and you're going to get like an oppressive atmosphere. He also is seen in photographs and standing with people and walking through. And sometimes you can actually hear him throughout the castle. It sounds like walking, but also walking drag like from his bum leg. So you got the Great Hall that's also haunted. Now, the Great Hall leads into the chapel and the minstrel's gallery. The Great Hall is a long room. It's where we get the term hall now, where, just into your bedrooms. But the Great Hall was actually like the main entrance into the castle itself. So, in this long gallery that is the Great Hall, um, there's a bunch of artifacts from the past. And a lot of the times artifacts and antiques can actually contain energy from where they were prior. So these can't be good. Okay, so there is a life-size statue of a horseman sitting astride his horse. And then hanging up on the wall is a stuffed head of an elephant. It's huge, right? And it has chainmail, like it's ready for battle. So I'm guessing it's to show, like, the war elephants. And then there's a long tapestry hanging from the wall, and behind it is a skull. I have no idea whose skull it is or who it belonged to. And just think, could you imagine dying and your skull is just taken and put behind a tapestry? It's weird, right? And I actually Googled, whose skull is that? And Google didn't know either. So I tried to look it up for you. Now, the skull that's hidden behind there, when people go near that tapestry, they experience cold spots and they hear noises. Also, from the courtyard, if you're standing in the courtyard looking into the Great Hall, you can actually see figures moving through and passing the windows when nobody's there, and they know no one's in there. And then the skull actually is said to move itself. Now, is this somebody playing a joke? Who knows? But it stays in the Great Hall, so it just kind of moves around in there. So it's nice that it doesn't try to lose itself, I suppose, but I feel bad for the person the head belongs to. Now, as you go into the minstrel's gallery, basically, pardon the coughing, it's a balcony overlooking what's now the tea room. People have been pushed down the stairs there. On the balcony itself, people get terrible, terrible headaches and they get sick to their stomach, and sometimes it gets so bad they want to jump over the side, or they feel like they need to jump over the side, which is pretty scary because all the way down it's just cement and concrete. It's a really hard surface. Another story that is said to have happened in the tea room happened while it was being excavated. The witnesses say that a giant toad-like creature came through the wall before changing into human form and disappearing. It now haunts the castle. A place is crazy when you got big-ass toads coming out of walls. What could that even be a ghost of? I mean, honestly. Was he a prince? The princess kissed him, turned into a human figure, but was a jerk? I don't know. It's weird to me. But it is what it is. And then we got the pantry. And in the pantry, it's called the White Pantry. A ghost appears dressed in white, looking very pale and sickly. Allegedly, one night, a guard had locked himself into that pantry because that's where they kept the silver, so he was guarding the silver. And he obviously locked the door from the inside so he could get out. And as he was in there, he noticed a woman, and she was begging for water. And he turned around without thinking to grab this woman water, turned back around thinking, she's not supposed to be in here, and she was gone. And it's rumored that this woman was poisoned and died within the castle walls. Now she wanders the castle looking for help to this day. And really, with all the madness that's gone on in this castle, is that really that difficult to believe? I don't think so. attached to the pantry was the adjoining dungeon because, if you're going to keep silver, you're going to keep your flour, your sugar, might as well have an adjoining dungeon. Why not, right? Why not? So, they actually found that it had been bricked up. So they knocked the bricks down, and into the dungeon, it was all right there, right? You got the typical graffiti you'd see in like dungeons and stuff, and what you'd expect. The little markers counting down your time. Maybe John was here, I don't know. But it's a tiny, tiny little claustrophobic, small space. And in that space, there is something called an oubliette. And oubliette is French for to forget. So what they would do was they would throw people into this hole, and maybe they're sick, maybe they're starving. They would just throw them in there to die, close the lid, and never go back to check on them. And actually, if you go to Chillingham and you go into the dungeon and look down into the trapdoor area below where the oubliette is, you actually see the skeleton, a real life skeleton of one of the last people to get thrown in there. No wonder they bricked it up. That carries some bad juju. So, how do people live in a place where there's dead bodies just chilling? I don't get it. Now, we're going to talk about the chapel. Now, the chapel obviously is most castles or, fortresses have a chapel. Where the knights and the soldiers would go to pray. So, here you are in this chapel, getting ready to go to war, fight the Scots, and you're kneeling and praying, like, please let me kill the Scots, please let me capture and torture them, please let me, those kind of emotions linger, and not to mention that's kind of sick, because why is God going to take your side over the Scots, and vice versa? Do you think God's looking down being like, yeah, I hope Eddie the Hammer wins? No. It's ridiculous. No. So, got all those emotions lingering. Now, hanging on the wall, you've got, the regular chapel stuff. You've got, you've got flags. You've got swords. You've got all the stuff that was taken into battle. But then next to it, you have crucifixes. You have paintings of, Mary, the Mother of Christ. You have all of this stuff. So you've also, let's see, there was one other thing, like a spirit bell, but maybe that's in a different room. Okay, so now they're doing excavations in the chapel, and while they were excavating, they actually found relics and human bones under the floorboards. Now, relics, that's like the finger of St. John, or something that has strong religious bearing. People thought that, sleeping with the hand of John the Baptist, this is hypothetical, it's not an actual thing, but to give you an example, if you were sick with the plague, you slept with the hand of John the Baptist, you'd wake up cured. So that's what people thought of relics. The splinter of the cross. So a lot of places actually had relics. A lot of them were actually taken from Jerusalem and the Holy Land during the Crusades and brought up to like Europe and England. So now you got human bones, which it really isn't that odd because a lot of the times people would be buried in the chapel itself. Like the lords and ladies of the family, the very important people would actually be buried at the altar, up the walkway to that area. So that makes sense. I'm not too shocked about that. Now, if you go into that room, they say that batteries on your cameras will die, or if it's dark and you have a flashlight and you walk in there, the batteries of the flashlight will die. When your camera does work, they say that when you snap a picture, you get a bunch of orbs. Now, you have to be really careful with orbs because it could just be the dust blowing around in the air. And when you're in an ancient castle, I'm sure there's some dust. So, you really have to be careful with that. Now we're going to go into, hypothetically, not literally, we're going to go into the Edward room, or the killing room. This is where all those kids were, butchered with an axe. So, if you go into that room, all around the top runs a balcony. And then hanging up, or in that room, is a suit of armor with a two-handed sword. So we're not talking about the on-guard sword. We're talking about hack and slash, knight sword. Now, hanging on the walls, you have the weapons, you have the axe, you have all of this horrible stuff. You have pikes, helmets, and cow horns, because Chillingham actually has famous cattle. Now, the cattle there are famous because they are one of the only wild herds left in the world. So they've never been messed with. No vets ever checked them out, anything. So they're actually still wild. Displayed in the room are the documents found with the blue boy in the pink room. In the killing room, it's reported that you can hear disembodied voices, and a dark and sinister presence dwells in this room to attack people who enter. And that dark and sinister is my son, who is driving me crazy. All right, so now let's go out to the hanging trees. In the Chillingham's woodlands, there are 3 old gnarled trees. 2 of them have fallen down, and 1 is still hanging up. Now, this is where, the outlaws and stuff would be hung. So they would string them up, hang them in the tree, and not wait, okay, they're dead, let's take them down and bury them. No. They would, hang them and wait for their bodies to rot away and slowly, break apart and disintegrate and just hit the forest floor. To this day, people are still finding remains in those woods. Now, there's a story that says that these monks were walking through to get water, and they found these people hanging, but they weren't hanging by the throat, they were hanging from their legs. So obviously it would take longer for you to die, because you'd have to wait for all the blood to rush to your head. It's just horrible. So the monks decided, being holy men, that they were going to help these poor souls. So they helped them. Monks get busted. Now, you'd think, since they're holy men and they're just doing their Christian duty, that they would be let off, scot-free. But not at Chillingham. So the monks get hanged. And now, if you go, there's reports of seeing hooded monks wandering through those trees and through that general area and in the woods. Not even the driveway's clean. So now we're going to talk about the Devil's Walk. So basically the driveway up into the grounds itself. Now, it's also been soaked in blood. There's big trees there, more hangings, more rotting, body parts fall, and they're still being found. Now, a lot of the bones and body parts and of like the torture victims, obviously they're not going to bury these people. They don't want to give them a Christian burial. They don't really even have the time for a Christian burial for them. I mean, at this point, they're considering the Scots less than human. So what they would do is they would take the bodies and take them to this lake that is on Chillingham land and chuck the dead bodies into the lake. Still to this day, if you go to this lake, there are remains sitting at the bottom of it. An estimated several thousand at the very least. So it's very sad. So hopefully, the spirits one day move on and get some rest and don't have to worry about that awful place anymore. Now you can stay there. It's a bed and breakfast. You can rent rooms and experience it yourself. They have ghost tours and all of that. So if you're interested, or if you're ever in England, Northern England, check them out. You can do a tour, like I said. So hopefully you like this. Hopefully you're liking this new direction that we're going. Um, if you do, subscribe, give us a thumbs up, tell other people about it, and hopefully they like it too.